Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Going to be talking about humanoids today. I love these humanoid cases. I find them endlessly fascinating and I think they provide really incontrovertible evidence that we are not alone in this universe. I do think we're dealing with extraterrestrials here. I call this episode The Scariest Night of My Life. 10 truly bizarre encounters with extraterrestrial humanoids. I've got 10 cases for you today from all over the world, dating from 1968 to 2018, 2 from outside of the United States and 8 from inside the United States, including Finland, Spain, California, Illinois, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. We have different types of ETs, some multiple witness cases, some evidence to support these cases, such as landing traces and physiological effects and animal reactions and so forth. But mostly these cases to me are interesting because they're not well known and they contain unique details of high strangeness, really bizarre details that I think have something to offer in terms of helping us to understand what's going on here. So let's just get started with our first case, which I call I Was Never Afraid. This occurred on August 8, 1968, mostly in Ceres, California. Well, this is an interesting case because this took place on a lonely highway late at night. That is absolutely a category of encounters. Quite a few cases take place that way, which seems to me opportunistic in terms of the ETs just see someone driving down the highway late at night and decide, let's contact these guys. This is also a very long-lasting encounter, which I find quite interesting. And there are some other really interesting details. In this case, 40 years passed before the witness, Colin, that is a pseudonym, found the courage to report his encounter with a UFO and its occupants. He was actually watching an episode of the History Channel's UFO Hunters in 2008, which finally inspired him to come forward. It was back in August of 1968 that Colin and his friend Jack Cole, that is his friend's real name, decided to leave their homes in Los Angeles, California for a week-long trip to Seattle, Washington. And it was on the return trip from Seattle back to LA that their lives changed forever. Around 8 a.m. on August 8, 1968, they left South Seattle and began the 1,100-plus mile trip back to Los Angeles. This would normally take them a minimum of about 18 hours, so they did not expect to arrive before 2 or 3 a.m. They filled the gas tank up in Sacramento and continued south on Interstate 99, and they were about 12 hours into the trip and had traveled some 800 miles and were approaching the city of Stockton. At this point, Jack was driving, and he started to complain of an unusual feeling of pressure in his lower neck. They passed through Stockton and were near the town of Ceres, California, when they first noticed a strange light in the sky ahead of them. And as Colin says, I saw this light straight ahead, but a little high to be ground level. It was kind of bright, but it didn't look like it was moving, so I thought it was a TV tower or something like that. About 2 minutes later, it started to move up and off to my upper right. About this time, I felt the pressure from my lower back side of my neck, like something was trying to push me forward with pretty good force. So now they're both feeling this strange pressure, and as they traveled through Ceres, they lost sight of this strange light. But just as they were exiting the outskirts of Ceres, Jack started shouting and pointing out the driver's side window at a strange object covered with lights. And as Colin says, just across the other side of the freeway, and just above the lights from Ceres, was a banked oval ring of blue-black lights. With the windows rolled down, there wasn't a sound. It was going the same speed as us, exactly the same. It was then that I got such a strong feeling that they could hear and understand us. So at this point, Colin turned to his friend Jack and said, "It might sound nuts, but I'm going to ask them if they can hear us and understand us." So speaking out loud, Colin asked, Can you hear us? Can you understand us? Jack immediately started yelling as the ship appeared to obviously respond to Colin's questions. As Colin says, I looked over and saw it blink out its lights, and you could see it give us an answer by showing us the bottom side. It was diamond-shaped with lights pulsating. There was a cluster of different colored lights in the center and several at each corner. It stayed that way for a few minutes, then it gently went back to the ring of blue-black lights, still going the same speed as us. Now it was around this time that Colin looked out the right side window and was amazed to see a second object, about the same distance away as the first, not far away. Colin also noticed something else strange. Suddenly, there was no traffic on the freeway, and it was just a few moments later that a third ship appeared. As Colin says, suddenly, there was a third ship down in front of us, above the highway, about 30 to 40 feet. It was about a half block away, but we could see that it was lit up inside with a soft glow. There was a panel in the background middle of the ship. It had a lot of lights that changed patterns. There were about 7 to 8 figures standing in the windows looking at us. They moved around a little, but not very much. They really seemed intent on us. Now Jack was so shocked by the sight that even though he was in the fast lane of the freeway, he brought their car to a full stop. At this point, the two crafts on either side also stopped, and the craft in front of them remained still. Colin and Jack stared at the humanoids for a few minutes, while the humanoids stared intently back at them. Then, remembering that they were still in the fast lane, Colin suggested that they either start moving or get off the highway. And as Colin says, Jack started the car, and all three crafts began moving right along with us again. Now at that moment, a big semi-truck zoomed by them. The trucker waved at them, seemingly oblivious to the three strange craft still hovering nearby. That really puzzled Colin. So they pulled off the freeway to view the craft more closely. As Colin says, he did get off, but I think he was scared. But I was totally okay. I never felt afraid. So back on the freeway we went, and them with us. Then, one by one, they zipped off into the night sky, and then blinked off. So the men continued the drive home. They did notice that the area where the craft had left was right on the outskirts of Castle Air Force Base, which could be significant. They ended up arriving home around 2 a.m., which really surprised them, as normally this trip would have taken a bit longer than that. But most shocking was that looking at the gas gauge, they saw that they still had a third tank of gas. They thought this was pretty unusual, and that it was too much gas for the El Camino car, which didn't get great gas mileage. They also learned that there had been a number of UFO sightings in the Seattle area on the morning that they had left, so there were a few other really unusual details. Colin says that there were some other weird events on that day, which he did not include in his report. But as he says, even though it happened a long time ago, it's still fresh in my mind. A pretty fascinating case that lasted a real long time. It's interesting that the witness felt that there was more gas left in the tank than there should be, and that they got home earlier than they should have. Though I have to say I did sort of analyze the timing of this, and it is possible that they made it home at that time. But they would know better than I, so this could be a case of added time as opposed to missing time. And there are quite a few cases like this. It's also an interesting aspect that these gentlemen was able to sort of interact with the UFO. He felt like it was reading his mind and asked it to react, and it did. So that is also a fascinating aspect to this case that turns up in quite a few cases. Probably the most interesting and unusual detail for me was that both witnesses described feeling a pressure on their body. I've heard this a few times. People will be in the presence of a UFO and they can actually feel it sort of as a pressure on their body. I don't know exactly what's going on in this case, but I feel like it's probably some sort of force field, perhaps, or something intentional. Hard to say. These cases always leave more questions than answers, but I think it's an important case. So now let's move to the next one. And I have to say I have never heard one like this. I think this truly fits the definition of bizarre. I call this one the alien chauffeur. This one occurred on November 8, 1971, outside of Turku, Finland. And the witness is a teacher, a good witness, but yeah, such an unusual case. This remarkable case comes from Finnish researcher Mervi Virtanen. The witness is an anonymous 37-year-old teacher. I'll call her Olivia, that is a pseudonym. It was a cold, rainy night at 8:45 p.m. on November 8, 1971, as Olivia stood at a bus stop outside of Turku, Finland. She was waiting for the bus to take her home after work, and she had only been there for a few minutes when a dark car stopped in front of her. The driver was a human-looking man, and he asked her where she was going. So Olivia replied that she was going about 20 kilometers towards Turku, where she lived, and the man offered to give her a ride to the bus stop in her hometown. Now, seeing that it was raining, Olivia decided to accept the offer and stepped into the car, and they drove off. But it was then that Olivia began to notice several very strange details. The first thing she noticed was that she sensed some kind of invisible magnetic or electric field between the driver and herself. And looking at the driver, who was staring ahead at the road, so she could only see him in profile, she saw that he had a slender body and seemed elegant in a strange way that she couldn't fully describe. But most astonishing were his clothes. He was wearing this very unusual silver gray outfit. It was too dark for her to see it in much detail, but it definitely looked unusual. And more strange details soon emerged. The man began to speak to her, asking her all kinds of questions about her job as a teacher, about her students, and he seemed to be strangely unfamiliar with normal school life. The next strange thing she noticed was that the car was absolutely silent. No engine sounds, no thrumming of the tires on this pavement, and in fact, the car itself looked to her like it was floating about 3 to 6 feet above the surface of the road. So this really puzzled her. And yet another strange thing was that the road, which was normally pretty busy, had no other traffic. No cars in front or behind, and no cars passing in the opposite direction. So puzzled, Olivia looked outside and could see the familiar landmarks passing by along the roadside, but yeah, no other cars. Wasn't long after this that they arrived at the bus stop in her hometown. Olivia asked to be let off. The driver, however, said that he wanted to continue the conversation. Olivia told him that she had to leave because she had her children waiting for her at home, and the driver then asked if they could continue the conversation another time. Olivia refused, saying that her husband wouldn't understand. The driver asked where her husband was. Olivia told him that he was in Sweden on business and that she had to hurry home to care for her children. So she was clearly getting a little nervous about all of this. And this is when she told the man goodbye, and he also replied goodbye. And at this point, the car door opened by itself, she said. She immediately stepped out. The car moved forward and it disappeared from view. It did not disappear off into the distance, as the road was straight for at least a kilometer ahead of her. The car just suddenly disappeared into thin air. So that's another unusual detail. And there were more, because immediately after the encounter, she suffered from strange hot flashes. Later, she had other strange symptoms, including a severe headache, a reddened face, and static electricity on her body. I did a whole prior episode on cases which people picked up what appear to be extraterrestrial hitchhikers. So that case is sort of the tables turned. This lady was picked up by what appears to be an ET. Now, while she didn't see any UFO, I think there's enough strange details to say that this is something really unusual. I mean, one or two strange details would be one thing, but she describes not only this weird force field coming off of this person, but that he looked strange, he's wearing this silver jumpsuit, the car is not making any noise, it looks like it's floating off the ground. And these strange details really start to add up, The ET is asking all these weird questions. Ultimately, when she's dropped off, she watches this car disappear. So that, and the fact that there was no traffic on the road, these are all details that add up to, I think, show that this was a very unusual encounter, probably with an extraterrestrial, but you can make up your own mind about it. So now let's move to the next case, which I call I Was Shocked. This one occurred on December 6, 1978, in Alegria de Alava in Spain. In most respects, I think this is a typical case, but it's really interesting because it's not well known. This lady had a UFO land in her backyard and got a very close-up look at ETs. And I think what's interesting about that is that there's really no room for misperception here. This unusual case comes from Spanish researcher and author José Luis Guillerna. He investigated the case personally, actually traveling to the location and interviewing the witness firsthand. The witness is Pilar Martinez de Aregui. It was 40 minutes after midnight on December 6, 1978. Pilar was in her home located in the small village of Alegria. This is about 11 kilometers from Vitoria in Alava, Spain. She had just eaten dinner with her husband after a long day's work. Her husband went to bed while she cleaned up. She was opening the windows of their farmhouse when she noticed a powerful orange light coming from the fields outside. Ms. Pilar says, "At first I thought it was just a tractor, but then I realized it was like butane, very strong, like a fire, and I was somewhat shocked." So she's describing this really unusual, bright, fiery orange light. It faded slowly and then disappeared from sight. So after composure, she started to clear the table where they had just finished eating. And this is when there was a second flash of light, but much closer this time. This really caught her attention. So looking outside, she saw this completely spherical object moving at very high speed directly towards their farmhouse. She was gripped with fear, and she quickly ran to the light switch and flicked it off, plunging the room into darkness and hopefully hiding her from view. Looking back outside, she saw that this object had now landed in their field almost right next to their farmhouse, no more than 100 meters from the window, 300 feet. And she watched in panic as two very tall humanoid figures suddenly appeared next to the UFO. They did not seem to exit through any doorway, they just appeared next to it. They were both dressed in very light-colored, tight-fitting, one-piece coveralls, and each was carrying an object like a flashlight as they slowly approached the house. Now Pilar wondered for a moment if they could be vandals intent on setting fire to their farm fields, but they clearly weren't normal people, and she could now see this craft clearly, which was ovoid-shaped and was gently swaying, apparently not fully landed, but hovering just a short distance above the ground. So she hid behind the window blinds, still watching them approach. But as they got closer, she became afraid, so she fled to the bathroom and then to the bedroom. Still uneasy about what was happening, she finally got up and returned to the window for another look, and she got there just in time to see that this strange craft was now rising up from the ground, emitting a faint metallic sound, which she said was similar to that made by a, quote, coffee grinder. Again, researcher José Luis Guillerna visited the spot 10 days after the incident occurred, and looking at the location where this strange craft had apparently landed, he did find strange marks on the ground. So there you go, a fairly typical case of a UFO landing and humanoids. In this case, these were human-looking ETs, presumably ETs, though I think it is possible that this was a human-piloted craft, reverse-engineered. But that raises the question is why would they be landing next to some old woman's farmhouse and walking right up to it? It's really odd. But an important case, I think, because it did leave landing traces which were verified by a UFO researcher. So when there is physical evidence, I think that raises the credibility of a case. But certainly, it's a case that I think deserves to be better known. So now let's move to the next case. This is one of my favorite in this compilation because it's so unusual. There are many different types of ETs, but this description is, I don't want to say unique, but very unusual. So I call this case the hairy gray alien. This occurred in August of 1989 in an undisclosed forested location in Wisconsin. It is a single witness case involving a child, but I think it's an important observation of what appears to be a very unusual gray extraterrestrial. The witness in this case was only 10 years old when he had his encounter, but he remembers it vividly. The exact location is not listed, but it was in a rural area in the forests of Wisconsin. As the witness is anonymous, I will give him the pseudonym Hector. And even though Hector was only 10 years old, his father was a lifelong Forest Service worker, and this gave Hector a great love for nature and an excellent knowledge of wildlife in his area. And he enjoyed hiking through the woods. It was one day in August of 1989, the exact time of day is not given, that Hector had an encounter that would affect him for the rest of his life. As Hector says, "I was walking on trails behind my rural home. While walking, my dog suddenly stopped dead and began growling into the woods. I looked into the woods and saw an entity about 25 feet away, motionless, standing against a tree. It was completely silent and completely still. Appearance-wise, it looked like a traditional gray alien, about 4 feet tall, with a spindly frame and long arms and legs. It had huge black almond-shaped eyes and just small slits for nostrils and a mouth. However, what I saw was definitely not gray. Its body and face were brown, as if deeply tanned, and it had hair. Long, white blonde hair on its head, just like a human would. So for the next 5 or 10 seconds, Hector stared in shock at this alien, and the alien stared back right at him, still completely silent and motionless. But then it started to move in a very peculiar way. As Hector says, the creature began to sway from side to side. The wind suddenly switched and began to blow harder, and that's when I ran. I ran to my house in a panic. My parents were both home, and I told them what I saw. So after hearing Hector's description, his father asked him, "Perhaps you saw a white-tailed deer facing you." Hector vehemently disagreed, as he says, "It absolutely was not." Now, to his parents' credit, they did believe he saw something. As Hector says, "My parents knew I'd never be that frightened and upset over nothing, so they both ventured outside to the area I saw the creature and returned after seeing nothing there." After this, strangely, the subject was not brought up again for years. But about 32 years after the incident, Hector did ask his mother if she remembered what happened. And as Hector says, "She told me that she did, as she'd never seen me that scared before. 32 years later, we still remember." Now, like most people who've had a direct face-to-face contact with an extraterrestrial, Hector was profoundly affected, and even today the encounter still affects him. As Hector says, "Ever since, I feel a visceral reaction to depictions of gray aliens. They not only frighten me, they make me irrationally angry as well. It's such a deep feeling, I thought I would mention it. The sight of them on TV or in books triggers a sort of avoidance instinct in the extreme, and I need to turn the page or change the channel." It was 33 years after his encounter that Hector finally found the strength and courage to share it publicly. Such a fascinating case. There are other cases of people who describe grays having hair, but it certainly does not turn up a lot. It's also an interesting case because this witness was walking with their dog, and the dog saw the ET first. And they were close up enough to this figure, this gray, to definitely there not be any real chance of misperception. Like the parents said, "Oh, maybe you saw a deer." Don't think so, because you can tell by how deeply impacted the witness was, later seeing pictures of grays and just not being able to even look at them. There is a possibility there's more to this encounter. When someone has that strong of an emotional reaction, it's kind of a red flag. Then again, maybe this was just a very close-up view of a gray alien. It's interesting to me also how this alien started swaying back and forth. Don't know what's going on there, but I would be interested to know what exactly the ET was doing, making those kind of odd movements. A very interesting case. So now let's move to the next one. This one is so fascinating to me. I call this one, I Froze Dead in the Middle of a Scream. This occurred one evening in March of 1994 in Middleton, New Jersey. And this is such an interesting case for me because of how the witness recalled his encounter. This case comes from an anonymous gentleman, so I'll call him Peter. He submitted his first-hand eyewitness testimony to MUFON. Sometime in 2011, Peter was running downstairs, something he had done many times, but this time he forgot to duck his head and accidentally smacked the top of his head into the ceiling. He sat down dazed and was recovering when suddenly he remembered a strange event that had happened when he was just a young boy in his childhood home in Middletown, New Jersey. Weirdly, he had completely forgotten it. Somehow banging his head on the ceiling brought the memory of it back. This strange event occurred sometime in March 1994. And as Peter says, I'm a little kid when this happens. I wake up in the middle of the night. It must be close to morning. The moon is full and so bright that it's casting a shadow of a tree that used to be there. For some reason, I start staring out into the yard behind mine. When I did this, I saw what I thought were two orange balls floating into the yard. As they got closer, I could see there were people with orange, kind of rounded glass helmets with white suits, like a spacesuit. They had two arms that stuck out from either side, and at the tips on the bottom, it would pull out these little white rings. But as the rings got closer to the ground, they would grow larger, somehow creating forces that lifted them over both fences. They didn't travel side by side. One was 30 to 40 feet behind the first one. They went around the right side of my pool and floated over into my backyard. So at this point, Peter is kneeling on his bed in his bedroom. His hands are on the windowsill. His face is pressed up against the window, and he's staring out in amazement at what he is seeing, because it's now clear to him that these beings were not human. As Peter said, one is in my backyard, and the other is going off to the right, when I noticed that the first one was looking at me. It then floated up to my window until I was staring at this person in the face. Even though the color of the helmet was a very bright orange, I could tell that it had pale white or light-colored skin. Its eyes are a little bigger than ours, but they are completely black. It had a small nose. I didn't notice ears. It had very thin lips, but you could tell that it had a mouth. I am looking at this guy for a few seconds, and I had no feeling of fear at all. I was just in awe. But as soon as it smiled at me, my heart sank. This is when I was going to run straight up to my mom and dad's room, screaming for mom. But Peter never made it, because as he turned and screamed out, all he got out was the word "ma," and he became paralyzed and unable to speak. As Peter says, it did something to me, and I froze dead in the middle of a scream. After that happened, my mind goes blank. So this is where Peter's memory of the event ends, that he feels certain that this event did happen to him. The strangest part is that the memory of the event had completely left his mind for a full 17 years, until by chance he hit his head on the ceiling, and this brought the memory back in vivid detail. As Peter says, I can remember very clearly seeing two aliens in my backyard. I never had any memory of the events before I had hit my head, and I have thought about it every day since it happened. That is so fascinating to me how this witness recalled his encounter. There's something that I call a cue. People will have missing time or not even remember anything until suddenly there is something in their environment that allows them to remember their encounter. Many people have told me that it was the cover of the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, and just seeing that image of a gray alien that brought their memories back of an encounter. But it can really be anything. Seeing a light in the sky, the words UFO, anything that reminds them of their encounter can bring it back out of the blue. I talked to one gentleman. He didn't remember anything until he was an adult at a childhood encounter where he was taken on board, and having dental surgery as an adult brought his memory of his encounter back. So that's clearly what happened in this case, but the gentleman bumped his head. So talk about having your memory jogged. That's literally what happened to him. So interesting. And I suspect there's probably more to that case than he can recall. So if there is, I hope he comes forward and shares what happened. So now let's move to the next case, which I call I Was Shocked Beyond Belief. This case is a multiple witness case, though only one saw the actual humanoids. It occurred on July 27, 2008 in Columbus, Ohio. And I have to say I have never heard a case quite like this, so I'm glad that there is a multiple witness, because otherwise I think the witness might have really questioned his sanity. So, well, let's just get to it, and you can make up your own minds about it. This very unusual case comes from two gentlemen, a couple, one who is the primary witness. As they are anonymous, I have given the pseudonyms Josh and David. They are partners and live together in their home in Columbus, Ohio. On the night of July 27, 2008, at about 3 a.m., they went to bed. Josh lay awake when he noticed a very strange optical effect on the ceiling of their bedroom. As Josh says, I was staring at the ceiling, which I have done many times before, when I began to notice it looked like a snowstorm of stars. I just thought my eyes were focusing in the darkness. When it started to intensify, the ceiling looked almost like I was traveling through space. So Josh first thought that there was something wrong with his eyes or his health, but he was only 34 years old and in excellent health. And as the weird effect became more pronounced, he finally told his partner David that the ceiling was looking really strange to him and to look up at it, and did he see anything strange? David did and replied, "Yes, what is that?" Josh replied, "What? You can see that?" David said, "Yes." So events now suddenly escalated into high strangeness. As Josh says, we then proceeded to lie there and watch what seemed to be a cosmic show, when suddenly I felt something around my foot or ankle, and I began to feel little pinpricks on various parts of my body. I began to scream and crawl up my bed. So he grabbed David and shouted, "I swear I just felt something touch me." As Josh says, we both began to panic, and then we sort of laughed it off, and I lay back flat on my back and began to look at the ceiling. But this time, there was a much more intense illumination beaming from the ceiling at the foot of my bed, and as I started to look closer, to my horror, I saw a huge face at the foot of the bed surging towards me, or hovering in the midst of this fog or haze or illumination, moving like I had never seen something move. Panic struck me like never before, and before I could really process what was happening, another green-like glowing vapor or haze appeared around the side of the bed, and to my disbelief, I saw about 15 or so smaller-sized beings appearing in the haze. I began to scream and cry like a child. Mind you, I am a 34-year-old man who does not just break down sobbing in terror. Now, weirdly, his partner David was unable to see any of the beings, but he did see Josh's intense fear, and he also began to panic because of it. And as Josh says, as I wrestled to clutch for my partner and flip my body towards the other direction, I was struck with intense pain in my upper back on the right side, like something did not want me to get away. My partner leaped out in terror at what I was doing and flipped on the light, trying to reassure me that there was nothing in the room. After some moments, the experience just ended. But Josh was left badly traumatized. The figures he saw, he says, looked just like gray aliens. As Josh says, I don't know what all this means, but the faces of the smaller ones were those alien faces we have all seen many times over the years. I was shocked beyond belief. They appeared to be observing the bigger interdimensional one. I cannot get this experience out of my head. Is there anyone that can help me? Definitely a very unusual case, and yet, in many ways, it fits a very common category of what we call a bedroom visitation. That is, in fact, the most common place to see is an extraterrestrial would be in your own bedroom. This is when most people are visited. So that definitely fits a very prominent pattern. Don't know what was going on with the ceiling, but that seems to me intentional, perhaps to get the attention of the witness. I don't know. Very unusual aspect about this case is he describes so many of these little gray ETs in his bedroom. Usually it's one, maybe two or three. More than that is very unusual. So yeah, a really interesting and bizarre case for sure. Now let's move to the next one, which I call the scariest night of my life. This occurred on November 24th, 2004 in Leesport, Pennsylvania. This is a single witness case, but I like this case because this is a very good example of what we call a CE5, a close encounter of the fifth kind, or a human-initiated encounter. The witness in this case is anonymous, so I'll just call him Alan. He was 14 years old when he had his encounter. It was the day before Thanksgiving, November 24, 2014. Alan was watching television in his family's home in Leesport, Pennsylvania. A program was on which depicted a gentleman who claimed to be able to telepathically call down UFOs. Now, Alan was skeptical, but he was also intrigued by the idea of being able to initiate an encounter, so he decided to give it a try. As Alan says, I basically asked to meet the pilots of these strange craft and to learn about the vehicles and how they work. He did this all telepathically, which was one of the reasons Alan was actually willing to attempt it, because as he says, it would save me the embarrassment if I give it a try. Now, to his amazement, the telepathic summoning seemed to work, because as Alan says, a couple of hours later, I was shocked to see a report on a separate channel, a news channel, that there was a UFO spotted over Reading, Pennsylvania, only minutes from where we lived at the time. Of course, this could have been a coincidence, but given what happened next, Alan does not think so. Because as Alan says, a few hours later, in the middle of the night, the red capital letters, "Wake up!" were flashed before my closed eyelids, and an alarm like a buzzing inside my head, an intense vibration. It woke me up immediately. I had been awakened, terrified by two alien beings commonly referred to as the Greys, standing in front of me, staring at me at my bedside. I don't know how they did it, but they had woken me up telepathically somehow. I saw them in front of me. The one that was closer to me was much taller than the other. I immediately panicked, throwing the blankets over my head and trying to calm my respiration and heart rate. I waited and waited for them to leave. It was sheer terror, the scariest night of my life. I heard feet rustling on the carpet. As daylight began to break, I took a cautious peek to see that they had left. So Alan had called out to the ETs, and they had apparently responded. But his encounter with them wasn't quite over yet, because it was just a few nights later that he had an unusual urge to watch TV late at night on a school night. And he's not even sure why, but as he says, I suppose I was still shaken from a few nights prior. His stepmother normally kept the television remote control in a kitchen drawer, so he went in there to retrieve it. And it wasn't in the drawer, so he began to search the kitchen for it, and this is when he saw the aliens again. As Alan says, I turned around and skimmed the countertop of the kitchen island, only to see the same creature from nights before standing outside of the kitchen window staring at me. Startled, I must have jumped 3 feet in the air and ran out of the kitchen up the steps to my bedroom. So going to bed that night, the high strangeness continued. Because as Alan says, that night I had a strange and vivid nightmare of my blankets being lifted into the air and being dragged out of my bed by the ankles by the hands of two shorter grays, then being returned to my bed and watching them leave through a strange pink portal in the wall. So today, Alan remains convinced that he somehow initiated an extraterrestrial encounter. He never saw any UFO, but he did meet the aliens. As Alan writes, I have decided to go public about the terrifying things that have happened. That case, I think, is a bit of a cautionary tale. Be careful what you ask for, because reaching out to ETs can, in fact, initiate an encounter. And the very best way to do a CE5 is absolutely through mentally calling out to them telepathically. It's all about consciousness, as many people have said. ETs communicate telepathically, so if you reach out to them, sometimes they will respond. But again, be careful what you ask for. It's one thing to see a UFO, it's quite another to see an ET, and I suspect in this case he probably was taken on board and only remembered it through the dream state. I wish there was more details to that, but such an interesting example of a CE5. So now let's move to the next case, which I call We Are Still Afraid. My heart goes out to these two ladies who had such an incredible encounter. This occurred on May 5, 2014 in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is a very extensive case. Again, another example of people who have an encounter on a highway late at night. This happens so often that it definitely, again, does deserve its own category. But I think you'll find this a particularly interesting and unusual case. This very extensive and unusual case comes from a mother and daughter who reported their experiences to both MUFON and Newfork about 2 weeks after it occurred. Peter Davenport of Newfork writes, "We spoke with the witness via telephone, and she assures us that the report is sincere. The witnesses are anonymous, so I'll call the mother Elaine and the daughter Anna. These, of course, are pseudonyms. It was around 8:30 p.m., again on May 5th, 2014, as Elaine and Anna drove southbound on Interstate 77 through Charlotte. Anna was driving and Elaine sat in the front passenger seat, and as Elaine says, I noticed a really bright light off to the right of us up in the sky. This huge thing was just floating there in the sky. It was no plane. It was silent. It did have blinking lights, but they were pretty insignificant compared to the huge, bright, white, shiny string of lights that seemed to be in front of this thing. So Elaine asked, "What is that?" Her daughter pointed out the blinking lights and said it was probably a plane. But Elaine wasn't convinced, and the two of them began to argue about what this thing might be. And they kept their eyes glued on it until they reached a section of the highway which had bright streetlights, and this blocked their view. It was at that moment that something very strange happened. As Elaine says, all of a sudden, a huge round ball of solid bright white light came right at the windshield, out of nowhere. It took up most of the windshield. I braced for impact, but it didn't hit the car. It just kind of seemed as though it evaporated into it. Anna shouted out, "What was that?" Her mother said, "You saw that? I don't know what that was." So both were frightened and stunned. They could actually feel the heat of the light on their face and hands, and both noticed an odd pain in their stomachs following this. Anna in particular complained that she wasn't feeling well. Not long after this, they said a large helicopter swooped right over their car. They thought that was strange. So Elaine ended up calling her husband and telling him what happened, and because Anna was feeling unwell, they pulled off at the Denny's restaurant in Rock Hill. I think this is the one right here you can see. Retrieving their jackets from the trunk, they noticed something strange. Everything in the trunk was unusually hot, including their jackets. So after staying at the restaurant and getting something to eat, they weren't very hungry. They did notice a strange time discrepancy. It was 11 p.m. when they thought it was only about 10 p.m. So they got back on Interstate 77. Elaine was driving, And as soon as they began driving, these strange lights showed up again and actually seemed to come right towards their car. Anna shouted out, "It can see us! It's looking at us!" Now these lights now had the appearance of a line of red lights. And as Elaine says, then it flew over the car. By this time it was moving very slowly and low. The whole thing turned slowly like it was facing our car while staying in the same spot. Strangely, there was no traffic but us. So both were pretty scared, and became even more so when this object appeared to change shape. So they took off to get away from the object. They were still on Interstate 77, now between Rock Hills and Columbia. They had a video camera and wanted to capture it on video, so Elaine decided to turn around and head back towards this object. And she calls this, quote, "the worst decision of my life." So almost immediately they came upon the object, and as Elaine says, it was as if it was waiting for us. I skidded to a stop. We were in shock. It was at tree level. We were just sitting there stunned. So they sat there for several minutes. Then, with the object still there, they decided to get back on the I-77 south. They pulled off at a Shell gas station to relieve themselves. And then making a U-turn to get back on the freeway, they were shocked to see a strange entity standing by the guardrail. As Elaine says, "We saw something standing there. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It was right next to the road, right next to the door of the car. It seemed to be bristling, like it was luminescent in some way, but it was really dark colored, like it was camouflaged. It moved towards the glass next to my daughter. She put her hands and arms up over her face and head and tucked her head downwards. That's how close it was to her door. It was dark gray-green. I could see a larger than normal rounded top of a head that came down to a short little neck area, then straight out to both shoulders. Human shoulders aren't shaped that way. It had very thin, long arms. The thing that made me realize that it wasn't human was that its waist was only like 8 inches wide, and that it was about 4 feet tall. I remember thinking, it's so skinny. So Elaine drove off, and her daughter turned to her and said, "Was that a person?" They had actually planned to drive home, but decided to stop to sleep in a hotel because they were so overwhelmed. And later, reconstructing the trip, they realized the trip should have been about 1 hour and 45 minutes, took almost 4 hours. They do believe that they probably had missing time and were probably taken on board because both found a strange unexplained bump behind their right ear in the same spot. Anna was so frightened by all of this that she doesn't even want to talk about it, but Elaine feels compelled to get some answers. As Elaine says, "I am submitting this report because I feel that people should know what my adult daughter, 28 years old, and I went through. We are still upset and still not our usual selves. I guess we are both upset and we are not sure what to do about it. I can't get it out of my mind. I just can't get the image of that creepy little thing out of my mind. Even right now, I can still see it. Every time I get the same feeling of outright fear. We think we are still being followed. We are still afraid. It's still very upsetting. I don't understand why it chose us. I am still scared. I still can't believe that it happened at all. But I know it did. We know it did." Now Elaine adds one small, but I think an important detail, which is so bizarre that she doesn't know how to explain it, but says it occurred while they were looking for a restroom after seeing the UFO and before seeing the humanoid. As Elaine says, "I saw a black bear on the side of the road. It was sitting up like a rag doll propped up. Its legs and arms were forward, and it was sitting on its rear end. Its shoulders were leaned forward, and its head was gone. Not chopped off, was flat where its head had been. My headlights lit it up. I could see a dark, hairy ring, a red, meaty ring, and its spine in the middle. The head was not there. This may or may not have anything to do with everything else that happened that night. I just thought I should include it." I really do feel for witnesses who go through an encounter like this because it's difficult to process. You can tell that they were quite traumatized The daughter still doesn't want to talk about it. The mother is seeking answers. It's pretty clear that they were probably taken on board, given that they do have this mark behind their ear. That is a commonly reported detail in onboard encounters, though neither of them have any memory of it. There's also this sort of missing time aspect, another huge red flag. But some really bizarre details to this case, like the ET just standing there on the side of the road. To me, the very most bizarre aspect of this case is the mother's description of seeing a headless bear. I have no idea what's up with that, but clearly it is related, because it's not every day you see a UFO and then an ET and then a headless animal just kind of sitting there in a way that's not at all normal. So perhaps that was a screen memory, I don't know, but I can certainly see why these people decided to reach out and try to get some answers, and I hope they find them. There's a lot of people dealing with these kinds of experiences. It's one of the main reasons I do this research, put out these cases, because I know a lot of you out there are experiencing these kinds of things, and there are these rare, bizarre details that turn up. So yeah, I'm sure that there are other people who've experienced this exact same kind of thing, but most people don't report it, especially if it's got these truly bizarre and unique details. So now let's move to the next case. I think this is probably my favorite in the whole bunch, though that CE5 one with the young kid is also really interesting. But this one, wow, I call this one the alien in my closet. This occurred on May 1st, 2016 in an undisclosed location in South Dakota. It is a single witness case, but what's interesting to me is that this gentleman had a very amazing interaction with this gray extraterrestrial. This very unusual and intriguing case comes firsthand from an anonymous witness I'll call Eli. It occurred in an undisclosed location somewhere in South Dakota. On the evening of May 1st, 2016, Eli was asleep in bed with his wife when a strange noise woke him up. As Eli says, I opened my eyes facing the closet door, and I saw 3 long gray fingers slide out and slowly pull back the closet door until it had enough room to poke its head out and lock eyes with me. The creature had rich gray skin, large black almond eyes, and while I couldn't see its entire body, its face was a few feet from mine, much larger. One eye was about half the size of my face. The creature must have cleared 6.5 to 7 feet. Now Eli could also see that its forearm and hand were much longer than a human's, and it looked to him like it was almost hanging out of the ceiling of the closet. Seeing that it was an alien creature, he decided to take quick action. As Eli says, I immediately jumped up to grab my Glock 19 on my nightstand, but instantly realized I couldn't move. My body didn't feel too heavy to move or tingle. It's just that there was no connection between my brain and my limbs. I screamed in my head for several seconds for my wife to wake up, but was immediately caught by its gaze. It began smiling at me, and somehow I understood it was testing my reaction to it, amused at my powerlessness. Slowly but surely, I focused on my limbs, and as soon as I got my foot to twitch, the being became irritated. It was a battle of wills. I realized I was in control of my own body and started pushing through the block. It expressed its irritation by showing its teeth, which I wasn't aware gray beings have. The long, pointed teeth were terrifying. By this point, I had partial control over my right arm and left leg, and began pulling myself to my pistol. As soon as I slid my hand onto my nightstand, the being slowly pulled its head back into the closet and began to slide the door shut. As soon as the door clicked shut, it was like a switch was flipped, and I had full control again. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my pistol, hit the light, and flung open the closet door. Now Eli was ready to shoot, but the closet was now empty. The only evidence of the entity was a, quote, sweet, weird chemical smell. He estimates that the entire encounter lasted about 3 minutes, and he believes the purpose of the encounter was somehow to test him. As Eli says, it did not speak with words, but with intention. I don't believe it wanted to harm me, but was testing me to see how I reacted. And when violence was my reaction out of fear, it showed me how powerless I was, until I realized I could focus and push through its block, at which point it became angry and departed rapidly, leaving before I regained full control. Some super fascinating details to that case. In many ways, it is typical. It's your bedroom visitation with a gray alien. But what I find fascinating about it is that this ET came out of the closet. I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed people who describe this exact same thing. ET's hanging out in their closet and out they step and into the room. What's also really fascinating about this case is that this gentleman had a telepathic link with this gray ET and felt that it was testing him. And he could feel the emotions coming off of this gray. So definitely they are emotional. One detail that I found really telling was his description of the gray having teeth. Very, very few people ever describe seeing the teeth of a gray alien. And in every case that I've heard of, when they do describe these grays having sharp teeth. So to me, that's some level of confirmation of the validity of that case. But really fascinating, because although it was somewhat scary for him, he ultimately decided that this gray did not mean him any harm and was just kind of testing his reaction, which was what? One of fear and violence. Typical human reaction, and I suppose perfectly understandable if you wake up and see a 7-foot-tall gray with sharp teeth in your bedroom. So now let's move to the next case, which I call There Was Something Inside It. This occurred on July 17, 2018 in southern Illinois. This is a really fascinating case of a close-up UFO sighting with humanoids looking down at the witnesses. This case comes from MUFON field investigators Barry Gaunt and Bill Kidd, and Illinois State Section Director Sam Maranto. He published an article in the February 2019 issue of the MUFON UFO Journal. The primary witnesses are an anonymous couple whose names are known by MUFON, but for the purposes of this presentation, I shall call them Steve and Sarah. It was a warm summer evening with clear skies on July 17, 2018, as Steve and Sarah drove up to their home in southern Illinois. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah, who was driving, noticed a strange light in the sky. It was a brilliant orange color with an intensity unlike anything she had ever seen before. So she pointed it out to Steve and asked, "What's that light?" Steve didn't know, but he kept his eye on it as he exited the car. Sarah now occupied herself by retrieving the groceries from the car, and as Steve says, then it moved, which really caught my attention. About this time, I noticed a small light coming out of its right side. So Steve watched as this smaller light descended in a falling leaf motion, while the larger object veered off at a sharp angle, shrinking in size. So at this point, he wondered if it might actually be an airplane crash, but there was no sound. So he walked away from the truck around the house to get a better look at this object as it descended behind the trees and disappeared from view. But it was only moments later that he saw another strange dark object hovering among the nearby trees. As Steve says, "I noticed another object, maybe 500 feet from me, and then I froze. It was cigar or oval-shaped with no wings. It was now close enough that the house security lights illuminated it, so he could see it pretty clearly. And the object then moved even closer, much closer, so that Steve could now see it was a strange craft of some kind, complete with large windows or a porthole. As Steve says, it was some 40 to 60 feet away and hovering 20 to 25 feet off the ground. It's flat black in color. I can see red and green lights. It's maybe 60 to 70 feet long by 15 or more feet wide and maybe 8 to 10 feet thick. Then I see shadows in a window in the front. I don't know what I see, a face, a shoulder, or whatever. I can't make it out. Now whatever is inside the craft, it's moving around, and stooping down, Steve can now see that this craft is in fact metallic, with a sheen and color that looks to him almost like titanium. He can see 2 red lights and 1 green light on the side. He said it almost appeared V-shaped, and now he could see that this figure inside was still moving about. It was a figure, so he became frightened and ran to alert his girlfriend. And as Steve says, I snap out of my shock, I guess, and run towards where she is walking in front of the vehicle and say, "It's a UFO." So they can now both see that there are definitely humanoid figures moving around inside it. They can see their heads, shoulders, torso, and arms. One of the figures bends forward, and at that moment, the bottom area of the craft lit up, and the craft moved in a quick, quote, almost fluid-like motion. And it rose right over a tree while making a sort of whooshing sound. The craft then moved very quickly up into the starry sky and disappeared into the distance. They ran inside and immediately called the police, who did not seem surprised and actually mentioned that there was an earlier encounter in this area. Both witnesses were pretty shaken up by the encounter. Steve experienced insomnia and became somewhat ill following this incident. Sarah was reluctant to go outside at night after this, and even their dog appeared hesitant to go outside for a few days following this encounter. So there you go, a really unusual case. I suspect that that might be a human-piloted, reverse-engineered craft, because there are certain details, the human-looking figures, the texture of the craft, the lights on it, the sounds it made. Hard to say for sure, but it does fit some of the details, and certainly it's possible. This is something we have to consider in a lot of these cases, that they're not ET, but are actually us. One interesting aspect of that makes me wonder about that, however, is the synchronicity of this craft showing up right when these people come home, almost as if it was waiting for them. And if this was human piloted, why the heck did it come swooping down and almost land and get so close to the witnesses? Seems like really brazen behavior and somewhat counterintuitive for a secret military aircraft. But again, these cases almost always raise more questions than answers. So I'm just presenting the facts as we know them, and you can make up your own minds about it. But there you go, 10 cases of extraterrestrial humanoids from all over the world, mostly grays and human-looking figures, which are the top categories, certainly in my own files. But the variation is amazing. And we see that sort of tanned gray with long white hair. Can't say I've heard that before. So there is this amazing variation among these humanoids, which again raises all kinds of questions. That's why this research is so important, so we can fully understand what's going on here, who these beings are, where they come from, and why they are here. What's clear to me is that this is going on. There is no way this can be explained away as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness. There are enough cases, I think, that the cover-up is going to collapse at some point. Disclosure is inevitable, and we're beginning to see that. So sort of a new era is dawning for humanity as the truth is coming out. So that's it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.